Okay. So my talk is on Krita, which is a 2D illustration program, comics, drawing, sketching. Most people associate it with KDE, but it's kind of branched out from there and become a project that is wildly, phenomenally successful at getting developed very, very fast. In my humble opinion, it's started to surpass GIMP as the software of choice to go to. And especially in terms of developer feedback. If you tell the guy you want a feature, he can probably get it handled. And GIMP is famously kind of bad at that. To get Krita, you want to go to krita.org. You can download it. There's Windows builds. There is Linux builds. There's a Mac build coming along. I would also recommend looking up the Krita Lime PPA if you want a very fancy, up-to-the-minute build. And more experimental super technology. Look up David Revoy, Linux for Krita on Linux for cats. This is not just a great article on how to build and Git and CMake Krita, but it's also just a good tutorial on that stuff in general beyond Krita itself. And it's got cute illustrations. So there's some very experimental stuff in Krita, like animation, and you can get it there. What is Krita? Krita is a drawing program. I'll show you a demo of something I made with it. This is my Christmas card from last year. I'm going to make another one. So you can do some really powerful stuff with this already. And the reason is because Krita focuses on being a brush tool first. And you know, if you've ever used Photoshop, it's got all these fancy tools.
Good day, everyone. This is what I'm going to be painting.
So this is Krita's interface. When you start it up, you get a variety of templates you can choose from. It has comic templates. It also has design templates. It doesn't have 8.5 by 11 because it's made in Europe, but you can manually type that in with custom documents. If you have something copied to a clipboard, you can create there. And when you start up, you get this sort of interface. So let's talk about what Krita tools you want to start with first. First off, the navigation stuff. If you middle mouse button, you can pan, and that's clicking in rather than scroll wheel. So you click and drag and you can pan around. You can also middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. I think you can also control middle mouse click to zoom in and out. And you can also use shift middle mouse button to rotate. That's very good OpenGL rotation. And if you get lost, you can use control apostrophe to reset your canvas. You can also use 4 and 6. Oh no, they changed it. I think you can also use 5. No, never mind. They updated. They changed all the hotkeys. The brush interface is the main thing that you want to play with Krita. And you can see that it's illustration focused because the first thing you do is when you right click, you get this beautiful palette of all your favorite brushes and all your favorite colors. It's going to have the colors that you've been using in the scene. So like if I throw some blue on here, then when I right click, that's now attached to the palette. You can also manually set which brushes you use by going up here and changing your, I think they changed it to be in the, I think it's in the configure Krita settings. So really fast, let's look at what some of these brushes do. It has this brush engine, which is very powerful, and you can test lots and lots of stuff. It's got a canvas over here that you can begin testing with, and whenever you want, you can reset it with a gradient or what have you. One of my favorite things in Krita is the sketch brushes, which you go down here. You want to also install Krita Sketch if you're doing this on Linux, because they accidentally forked the sketch brushes to the tablet version of it. So if you install the tablet version as well, then you have these brushes again. Up here you can see there are different options, and they just produce a very delightful sort of look to them. So I'm going to make this brush really big. And you can see I can just sort of very quickly sketch in a face or something. You can see how the sketch brushes work, which is if I go slow and hard pressure on my tablet, it will have more ink flow out of it. And if I go lightly, it'll draw lightly. But it's trying to draw a relationship to where your stroke came from, which is why if you go really slow, the line is really dark and hard. And then if you go fast, it sort of builds upon where that stroke came from. It's also got, as you can see, mirror mode, which is my favorite thing in the world. Here's a normal Krita interface. But if you turn on mirror, it'll actually duplicate from left to right. So you can very quickly do symmetrical drawing, which is very good for concept art or orthographics if you're going into 3D. I've drawn a lot of faces in Krita that I then delete. Other features that are really cool, I can show you how powerful this brush engine is. It's kind of got a lot of stuff that would be hard to cover entirely, but just to show you as an example of how you can set lots of things to anything, I think this is the brush that I want to show. There we are. So this brush creates this cool like road. If you look at how this brush is set up, I've selected it, and here I can change its auto brush settings, or I can basically change the type of the brush it is. So there's an auto brush where you can manually sort of use math to set what it is, or you can use a bitmap image, or you can create a custom brush based off of your active open document. You can also create one from what's on the clipboard, or type in text and show that. Or I think if I go to text and I say pipe mode, it'll need a big brush. On here. Oh, you have to change the text settings in this. So then you got a brush tip. And say, I don't know. Oh, yeah. Somewhere we change the size. Anyways, it's fun. But so with this brush, I can show you one way that you can change your settings. Let's change the brush tip back to that. So let's say I go to the size attribute. It's currently set to pressure. I'm instead going to set it to perspective. And I'm going to turn off the rotation. No, I do want rotation. So now, if I set a perspective ruler in here with the ruler tool, I'm going to set this to perspective. Whee! And now, when I brush, I've got to turn mirror off, into the horizon. And you can also make it snap to the grid with the assistant. So this is very useful for comics and stuff where you're trying to just bust stuff really fast. Again, that's not the perspective grid tool. It's actually the ruler set to perspective. What's the perspective grid? I think it just lays out guides for you to hand draw on. Yeah, this is the perspective grid. And then if you brush on it, it doesn't stick to it. So you want the ruler tool for that. What a messy canvas. Here's some other cool stuff. Does anyone here do 3D stuff ever? No? All right. So if you're ever making a 3D texture, a lot of times you want that to tile. If you hit W, you go into wraparound mode, and it's going to blow through the OpenGL. Yes. But you can very quickly have tiled textures. So if you're working with photos or something, you can have a photo brush of your grass bitmap and just draw it on, and it'll work. What other features do I love? Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about the, what's this tool called? Dynamic brush. So a lot of times, if we have a normal brush, and let's select a nice inky type brush. This looks like it's for inking, right? Oh wait, hold on, I gotta restart Krita. It's actually not recognized my tablet this whole time. Oops, I closed the Hangout. So yeah, you have to have your tablet plugged in when you start your document. This is a really old Intuos 3. Krita has really good support for most of the tablets out there. So yeah, ink brush. So a lot of times when you start out and you're like, yeah, man, I'm going to get my tablet out and it's going to be so much better than drawing by hand. And then you start drawing and you actually get these horrible, like it's going in and out on size and it's not actually like following the stroke. Like this is what happens everywhere. With dynamic brushes, you can change your settings to have strokes that sort of flow with your stuff. So I can turn the mask down and the drag up, and you can use this to get a stylized sort of look very quickly that has a nice sort of photographic. This is another great feature of Krita is dynamic canvas sizing. So if I am trying to move down, this crop my image to that. I don't know about that. So this is how I ink comics. Is I have this sort of set up, and then not this brush, but layer it in like that. Compared to what you would otherwise have. I draw grumpy old men a lot, if you haven't noticed. Again, focusing on Krita as a painting program that reflect this. So one is that if you hold Shift and left mouse click or just draw with your brush, you can manually resize your brush. Photoshop's what, like 45 years old now or something, and it still doesn't have that. Why? Another layer.
How are you getting that color palette?
It's right click. So right when you right click, the first thing you get is brushes and a brush-based interface. So one example is of how they focus on brush-based hotkeys is I and O increase the opacity, I think also you can use brackets to change the size, like Photoshop. Although all the cool kids use Shift and left mouse button. You can also use L and K to change the color of your ink. So if I hit L, it goes lighter, and if I use K, it goes darker, which is very handy if you're you go darker here, and you want a smaller brush, but then you want this light, right? So you go lighter. Very good interface. And of course, Control, just like many other programs. It's got really good blending brushes also. Another feature that's really fun is it has ultra symmetry brush, which is the paint with multi-brushes. And in the tool options, you can change how many of these points you have. So I can go down to 4, 3, or 12. And then when I paint, it's going to very quickly make a cool design. You turn on mirror to extra break it. Everybody following so far? Oh yeah, I had my hotkeys up here. Yeah. Another thing, so let's go into just looking at how you might have a artistic process for this. First off, I have a layers panel, and first thing you would do is a sketch. So again, I'm going to use the sketch brushes, and let's just try making a drawing really fast. A lot of these are pinned to the right-click brush palette. So when you go in, I'm going to draw a symmetrical drawing. With regular brushes. I'm just painting right on the background layer. And these sketch brushes let you sort of go very loose and fast, and you can focus on big areas of light and dark, which is a way that I really like painting. It's a lot more like charcoal drawing. If anybody here in Seattle would like more drawing practice, I do have an event that I run, which is the Ballard Life Drawing Co-op. It's every first and third Thursday, and it is the only free life drawing in Seattle. So, you know, live free or die, as we say. So very quickly, the sketch brush just lets me go, you know, a hard line if I need one here, or I want something inky, and soft shading if I want to do this. Much like Photoshop, D resets your foreground and background colors to the defaults, and X switches between them. So if a lot of times what I will do is instead of using erasers, I will just paint with white. His chin looks dumb, so I'm just going to erase the whole thing with white. This is one of the default brushes, which is very much like the old Kid Pick stuff. You can see it's under the experiment brush. And what it does is it lets you sort of draw shapes in. This is another way that's kind of fun to draw if you're trying to do these sort of value drawings, where you can, I'm not going to do it on this layer, but You could just very quickly say, I want dark here for the shadow under his eye, dark here under the nose, dark under his upper lip, dark under his bottom lip, mouth corners. And then you can start going with a lighter color. Use the L key, and just use that to lay in your side stuff. Lots of fun ways you can paint. I'm going to delete that. But I really like these sketch brushes. If you ever need to know how to use them, you can just hover over them and they'll tell you the name. The honest truth is that before you can really learn a painting program, you kind of have to learn some art stuff. So I encourage you to learn some art stuff. Making the shadow under his chin a lot darker. Again, just switching back and forth between. I'm just hitting X to switch between black and white over and over. And then when I want something that's a little more hard lined, I just go a little harder. Hard and slow. I think artists like to draw people with horns because then they don't have to draw hair. Yeah, really hulk him out. Eventually, I'll just start using a really big brush. Sometimes also, which is like set it to a you can see very quickly way to just blend is here that I want to be able to color select that halfway train. Then you can slowly start. Drawing is more like exercise than it is like programming. It's a lot of muscle memory. So the only way to really get good at it, just like if you want to get good at doing push-ups, is you got to do push-ups. So if you want to get better at drawing, you have to draw a lot. But the good news is drawing is kind of fun. I think its eyes more sinister. Or sleepy. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Kind of curious about what your transition state would be. Like, I've got enough line of color with that.
Right. So I use a process that a million processes out there. Mine is largely based around trying to imitate product painting. So in classical painting, what you would have is first you'd start like this, and you might even go so far as to block in this background by going something like that. Then you have something that historically was called a cartoon, which is where we get the word cartoon, which basically means an inked drawing. So I might create a layer on top of this. And then I would start saying, I want something that's really harsh lines that I don't want to erase and will always give me an idea of where my sketch is and where it's going. So for that, I might get something like this. And then I would start inking. I would turn this layer down in opacity and create a layer below it that is just filled with white. Go lower. All right, never mind. I would then use that brush to, and I might turn dynamic brush on, but with very low both settings. I'm actually going to fill this layer with white and set it to multiply. What multiply does is illustration or in image programs called the layer mode transfers. It changes the math of how one pixel interacts with the one below it. So this layer is filled with white and it's set to multiply. And what that means is it's going to multiply this white pixel that's 111 RGB values with this other white pixel below it that's 111, which means it equals 1. If I have a black pixel here with this brush, it's going to say black plus black of 0, 0, 0 times 111 below it equals the value of 0. And therefore, it's a black pixel. You do have to be careful with the dynamic brush because unlike when you're sketching, it remembers the whole stroke as well, but it's trying to create sort of a yo-yo effect. So you want sort of shorter strokes of just where you want it. So historically, the reason for this cartoon, or you would then start, is because the line draw would allow you to see below this layer or transparent oil paint, India ink drawing below it, and you can still see it until like the very last layer of paint. I'm just going to switch to regular brush. Called subforms, which is the idea that an object is, you can think of an object as you can think of as several. This is a subform, which leads into this, which leads into this subform, which leads into this one, which has these sort of side breaks, and this also has a little divot, perhaps. That's something to think about as you ink and try to find a line of the way that you want lines to contour. So after this, I would have a layer called grisaille. And what a grisaille is basically a black and white or monochrome line on top of something that highlights where. And so I'm going to turn my sketch back on to 100. So if I were going to start drawing on my grisaille layer, I would use something that's good for blocking in now. So I like this default Krita settings or something I modified. But I recently uninstalled and reinstalled Krita just for this.
Wait, question about the top layer you said it as multiply. So is the reason why you're using multiply rather than transparency that you just put black on top of so that you can use black and white technique?
A little bit. Mostly it's because I know that this layer is specifically lines. And so in that mimicking of a, you'll always see a little bit of the ink below. I will often duplicate this layer and have it be no matter what. This one just set to low opacity. So on my grisaille layer, even if I fill it with, bright green or what have you as I go, we would still be able to see ink underneath it, quote unquote, as a permanent thing. But the reason for that is because when I get to the grisaille layer, I actually do opacity, and that's mimic low and paint over your sketch, and then you're not going to be able to see your sketch anymore. So for this, I'm just going to start with black and white, and using this brush here, I'm going to set it to a low opacity and start to try and figure out where these forms are. So I might start with a lighter gray and just have that be everywhere, a wash, if you will. I'll turn this layer down a bit. And then I'm going to start blocking this in with blacks and whites. And also my color picked lighter blacks and whites. So for instance, I know there's a shadow under here. I'm going to go a little darker as I try to hit this. I'm going to work big before I go into detail. So I want this big shadow area first. I actually don't use a lot of layers, and a lot of people find that like you start out with these fancy programs, and you're like, oh man, this is so much better than MS Paint. I'm gonna have 1,000 layers, and then you slowly realize that the amount of work you're putting into just remembering what your layers are ends up damaging the value that they would provide otherwise. You can. If I double click on it, I can say grisaille pop cartoon. You don't have to use the fancy art term. You can just say light, dark, and ink monochrome sketch. This layer is dumb. and sketch. Something like that. Again, big shadow ideas before the little shadow ideas. So he's got this under his neck. I want him to pop out of this background. So I'm going to make the background darker and do a bit of vignetting. Vignetting is the idea that you have a camera, whether it's your eyeball or a physical camera, there's like the lens detector and then sort of a thing around it, like the blinders that are trying to limit the light that comes in. I don't know what I'm talking about. But as a result, you oftentimes get this sort of darkening around the edges. You know, I'm working really big right now, so the brush is a little slow. Eventually, it'll just be something like that. So let's just focus on the eyes, because everyone likes doing that. I'm going to start by getting this color and going a little darker. And a little less opaque. I'm just going to make this whole thing a little darker. Oh, let's look at my stuff. Right here. And then I might select something that's a little lighter. And now we can start going in and saying what we're looking at. So top of the eyeball with a little bit of light. No light. And this bottom lid is going to get some light as light hits it. This area is going to get a little more than over here because this is under this big nose and brow shadow. Speaking of which, I go a little darker here. It's good to get comfortable with the idea of painting up with white. Yeah, we all start just drawing art in the margins of our homework in grade school. And so we're very used to, from a very young age, the idea that the canvas is always white and then you paint up with black or you paint down with black. But in the painting world, you usually end up doing the opposite. You have to deal with this full range of colors. So oftentimes what I will do is, before I start anything, I will start by filling the canvas with default gray. A lot of what I'm painting is based around some pretty repetitive art theory that you have almost certainly heard before. A quick demo of that. So let's say we have this area over here. So let's say we have a sphere. Light works in a couple different ways. The first thing we have is the shadow that's on the sphere. So that creates something called the terminator. And everything below it's going to be filled in with shadow. You then have a certain amount of reflective light that comes up. So that means it's sort of art shorthand, but a lot of times this terminator line of an object is going to be darker than the rest of it. So I'm changing my ball to be a gray to start with. And terminator, right? Let's bust out Krita's blending brushes. too much blur. Look at that. Nice and soft. So again, a little reflective light comes in below it. And then you might have a highlight over here. You also have what's called Fresnel lighting, and that's the idea that as something bends away from you, like if a plane is facing you, it's not going to reflect a light ray right into your eye. And as it bends, it increases the amount it can do it. And different materials have different properties. This is almost more of a 3D talk now. But so a lot of times, you'll have a lot more lightness on a shiny thing around the edges, which we can fake by going over here and saying, oh, look, it's got a Fresnel along the edge here. Again, painting up with white. You then have a cast shadow, which is, so light is coming down from here. It hits this ball. It's generally lit over here. The place where the light hits, oh wait, it would be over here. The light where, the point where the ray hits is going to be especially hot, and also the angles of environment around it are going to be hot. And then some of that is going to cast the shadow downward. And that's going to make a cast shadow. And I'm starting to do something which is a contact shadow. And this is a big part of how to draw lines. What a contact shadow is in 3D it's called ambient occlusion. But what happens is out here in the environment, yeah, this is a hard shadow, but there's bounce light coming from everywhere. The whole blue sky is essentially a giant light. And so that bleeds into here. So when the light ray hits it, or when the shadow is cast, it still has light rays coming in and illuminating it. Every time that ray bounces, it loses a little bit of energy. And so eventually, reflectivity gets lower and lower. So eventually you get things way down here where you're going to start having really dark areas, because in theory, reflective light could bounce into these little crevices, but it starts to not do that. And that's why you can very quickly make a face out of just the contact shadows of it. So, the eyelids create a contact shadow where it's around the eyes. The nostrils create a contact shadow where it goes into the nostril. Your lip line is where two things come together. And as a result, when you make things like wrinkles and stuff, you don't want them to be darker if they're not a contact shadow. I don't know if that makes sense. Let's go back down here. All right, I have 5 minutes left, so I'll keep going to the next part. So let's say that's our finished grisaille. You can then colorize it to say that you used monochrome paint. And this also tells you a lot about whether you did it right or wrong. And it also, the reason you do this is you can really tell when something had good values. And value is more important than color. So let's look up a painter I love, William Bouguereau is, in my opinion, the greatest painter ever. If we just copy one of these images, at a glance, you're thinking, oh, pinks over here, greens over here, pink skin. In reality, if we create a Krita document and desaturate this, you can see how clearly his lights and darks define the image more than anything else. Desaturate. So here you can see that the figure totally more lit than the rest of the entire environment. And the things that really pop out on the figure as a line drawing are the contact shadows, such as a little bit right there in the corner, the nostrils, and the eyes. And then your eyeball is actually this big camera pinhole, so that's why eyes get so dark. And the hair has lots of little areas and crevices that light gets trapped, so it stops working. And then this fabric is really illuminated. So focus on light and dark first. And then you can start going into color. So like first thing I would say is compared to that, this background clearly is not dark enough yet. And then also now the eye looks too dark. So those are things that on a secondary pass, I would undo that and try to get way darker with the background first. And then have a unified value of the face so that this shadow that's getting cast by his brow, yes, it's dark, but it shouldn't be that dark. Really quick, because I have 2 minutes left, I did want to show some other stuff that Krita can do, because there's lots of cool stuff. One is, let's go over these other tools. First, you can draw with a line. It'll just draw the stroke. And you can go into the tool and change what you're simulating. You can also do that with Béziers. There it is. And again, this is a paint program first, and then I think you have to control click. You have to shift click to end your stroke, and then it'll paint on that. However, you can create a vector layer, and Krita does have vectors, at which point I think you can keep these around and change the layer properties. I think we want the arrow tool. So now we can select this, and under the tool options, we can change a lot of things like how it's filled. So we can say a gradient, creates a gradient. You can give it a drop shadow. You can change its stroke. A lot of people are using this to do straight vector art. And you can even have fancy vectors like a subtractive vector by creating a second vector layer. And change this one to be also filled. Let's just go straight opacity. So straight opacity, and I think we have to set this to erase. And it will erase from that. So you can have a vector setup where you're doing subtractive shapes like in Illustrator. I think that's all the time I have. Again, check out Krita. And also, Krita is going to be embarking on a new wave of funding. They are not going to have their corporate backer anymore, so they're looking into things like Kickstarter, big corporate partners, and something where you donate like $5 a month. So look into that if you want to help bring this up to speed. Any questions?
Does it handle any typeface?
It does. I have an extremely inappropriate comic I can show that I worked on. Does anybody mind? I better not. But you can take these objects. You can basically create a box object, and then when you select it, oh wait, no. Oh wait, you have to create a text layer or something. Yeah, it's like you create a vector layer, you create the vector. select it. And then under tool options, I think there's actually like a Docker for it. It's still not the best at that, but it does have it. What's his name? Timothy Giet has a good tutorial on it. He does lots of comics in Krita. So I would look up his website. I think he has a good tutorial on text in Krita. So, anyways, that's my talk. Card. And I'll post all that stuff, notes and whatnot, on my blog, ogblog.net. I'm so glad the projector worked. That's my big screen. Okay, it's on you guys. There's like 1,000 pamphlets left over to figure out. Oh, good. No problem.
But now I don't have a toolbox. So I guess yeah. I know a lot of problems.
Are you on the line PPA? Yeah. Put that on.
I just thought you could get the other one. And I think I just messed me up when I was on.
Wait, did you do the David Ruboy kit? I did that, and then I had to. It's getting some animation tools soon. They're gonna be super animation.